And we're back with another Black with No Cream podcast episode, live from Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, which is crazy to say because I've always wanted to come to Sundance and I've never had the chance to do it. But then Adobe hit me up and like, hey, do you want to bring your podcast out here and talk to some creatives? I said, yes. And now we're set up and that's what we're doing. And today we got to talk to Parker Laramie, who is an incredible film editor he actually has 2 films that are premiering live at Sundance this weekend. Like right now, they're premiering. Andre is an Idiot, as well as Train Dreams. So we got to talk to him about his whole career come up, how he got into all of this, how he was able to grow himself as an editor in this pretty cutthroat environment and make some pretty incredible films. He's worked on some wild stuff. So we'll get into it. I'll let him tell his story, but I just wanted to say we're back. This is cool. I love doing bonus podcast episodes. And thanks to Adobe for having us. If you haven't joined the Black with No Cream community, you got to do it. The link is in the description. Other than that, hi, I missed you. All right, let's get to this podcast. Bye. I have a friend who worked as an EP on a film that you edited, which was on Netflix last year, Dancing for the Devil. Mm-hmm. And she texted me and said that because she was telling me I should get you on here. And I was like, I have him here tomorrow morning. And she's like, he's one of the most talented editors I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And she's a big fan. So she says hi.
Who is it?
Jess.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the best. She's a sweetheart.
Really nice.
Just throwing my phone over here so I'm not distracted. Dude, I'm excited to have you on the podcast because as an editor, like I'm an editor and I direct and stuff too, but I'm like short form. I've done some doc work, but in the traditional form, like you're on a different scale and it's going to be really cool to just riff with you and like learn about your process and how you came into this space and how you attack your jobs. So thanks for coming and doing this. I think we started off, I'm going to move your mic a little bit, but I think we started off by just, why are you here? Where are we at? And what are you doing here?
So we're at Sundance, 2025.
Yes.
I've got 2 films here. One is called Andre is an Idiot. It's sort of a comedy documentary about dude who has stage 4 colon cancer. And then I'm here with another movie, which is completely different. It's a scripted project called Train Dreams, based on a novella by Dennis Johnson about a logger in the Pacific Northwest in the first half of the 20th century, kind of watching the country change before his eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you said yesterday you had one of the films premiere. Can you talk about how that went and what the reaction was?
People were laughing. Yeah. Which is the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was wild. I'd never seen it with a huge crowd. We'd done some test screenings with maybe 15, 20 people. But yeah, it was a packed theater, and the Sundance crowds are always like so enthusiastic and like there to like really enjoy the film, and they're always super verbal and like, I mean, that's my favorite part of coming to a film festival is like watching something that I know so intimately. I know every single cut, and sitting there in the theater and just feeling everyone riding it.
The wave that you created?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty surreal, huh?
Yeah.
You've been to Sundance before?
Yes.
You had other film in Sundance?
I was here, well, I wasn't here. It was in 2021, so it was the remote COVID one. I was here with a film called Jockey, which was also directed by Clint Bentley, who directed Train Dreams.
Oh, cool. So, yeah. So how, when you have a film and it's in that environment, do you get nervous? Are you nervous when you're trying to screen a film? Like, I feel like, or are you just confident in the project?
I don't know if I get a little bit nervous, I guess. But like the work is already done, I just have to sort of sit there. If the film starts and you can tell it's not landing, then I start to, you feel, I don't know, for me, it's more like I'm watching the cut. I'm watching it with fresh eyes. I'm like taking notes, not literally all the time, but in my head. I mean, even yesterday I was like, I don't think they're going to let us open this back up, but I got notes.
Which you said you guys just finished it like a week before this?
I think they were doing a lot of animations and stuff. Like the cut was locked like December. And then there were a bunch of stop motion animations and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they finished it, maybe 2 weeks ago.
And does it have distribution already? Like, also for some people here that are listening to this, I think understand film festivals, but could you explain to them, like, what the power of having a film in a festival and like what the routine might be for if your film doesn't have distribution or doesn't have it already prior and this is just a place to display it. Like what is that process in your eyes?
I mean, I'm very much at the periphery of that. Like as the editor, I get a call from the director being like, hey, the movie sold. Like, and then they sort of tell me the story of like, you know, how it all went down. So Andre's an Idiot was produced by A24 and Sandbox Films.
Got it.
So I'm assuming A24 is distributing it. But, but I don't know, you know, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know if they're going to do theatrical, if it's just going to be streaming or what.
Yeah.
With Train Dreams, that was produced by Black Bear Films and Kamala Films. And they're looking for a buyer.
Right.
And I know I think they've been pre-screening it and stuff, which the last 2 films I did with those people, those producers, both of those were sort of sold like in the day right before it premiered at the film festival. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. They're like, yeah, I mean, the movies are good. So.
But this is the first official screening of that film.
Yeah.
Public screening, I guess. That's exciting.
Yeah.
You just always, you know, I think for me, it's like I got into this and started studying films and you're thinking like, oh man, I want to make a movie or I want to make something that could get into a film festival someday. And you see the spectacle through film and television when they like recreate film festivals and then and certain things like that. And you never really know what it's like. And so this is my first time being at Sundance. So it's cool to be here, not having anything to do with it, but I also just created my first short film 2 months ago, which felt really good to make something sort of narrative based because I come from like a docu or a lifestyle commercial type environment. So it's weird to be here and think of like what the possibilities are. And then to sit here with you who actually has something that's going through the process of at the highest level, it's got to be pretty surreal and unique feeling.
Yeah. Well, actually, so I was actually here in Park City for a film that I did like, you know, I cut on it for like a couple of months, but they'd been cutting it for years. It was a film called Bending the Arc.
Okay.
Directed by Pedro Cos. And that was sort of my first I think I felt the way you feel now.
Yeah.
It was like, all right, like I don't really have a place here is how I felt at least.
Yeah.
You know, like I was paying my own way. I was coming, you know, totally to just sort of like be there with the team and sort of celebrate the movie. But it was kind of like this. It was snowing and it was like, we were staying in Salt Lake and because we got in late and it was like all this stuff. And I was just like, man, this is crazy. I don't know if I ever want to come back.
Yeah. Because it was stressful. Like it just seemed stressful.
Yeah. And it was kind of like, as the editor, you know, you don't necessarily need to come. And then I'd been to some other film festivals after that and with films where I was like the main editor.
Yeah.
And that was a totally different experience, you know, like once you're here with a film, you know, you have a reason to be here and it feels very right. And like, you know, and it's closure too. You know, you work on this thing for however long and, you know, it's the premiere. It's like you get to, you know, watch it with an audience and like you get to meet people that are like, oh my God, I saw that film, you know, and they talk about all these things. You're like, oh my God, we nailed it. Like we actually did, you know, like it's
you saying closure, literally like I have like goosebumps for some reason. Cause I don't know why that just hit for me. Cause it's like so many times, especially as an editor, like you said, you're in a room maybe by yourself for hours on end, weeks on end, months and years on end. Yeah. And you're alienated, right? You have teams, which is great, but everyone's in this thing. And I always like to compare it to like I just moved back home to Iowa I lived in LA for over. Moving back home, I can't really share what work is like to people there because they don't really understand it. And then it's fun because when you're in a room with your peers and coworkers here in this environment, they get it. But on a grand scale, it's hard to like have people, see the reward come. And so it's cool to hear you say like, it's the victory lap, like having it come out and seeing like the fruits of your labor and then have people that are here who truly do care about it. So you're getting like the realest reaction in real time, which must be pretty special.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the stuff I work on, I feel like is a little more niche and like, I mean, you know, I have tons of friends that like are super supportive and very excited for me, but like they never see the movies, you know?
Yeah.
and it's just crazy to be in an environment like this where people are like nerding out on your stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's a huge crowd. I mean,
Right.
it's like kind of surreal.
Well, getting to that point, like, I'm curious, like getting, the younger you seeing you now, right? Like this may have been a goal or maybe it wasn't. I'm curious how you got into all this to start with, and like, where were you born and raised, and how did you find your creative art outlet at that early age?
So I was like born and raised in LA.
Oh, cool.
And like all my parents worked in production. So I just grew up in it, and like, it was kind of like the family business, I guess. My dad was even an editor. By the time I was born, he'd kind of moved more into producing. But yeah, he was an editor. He did a lot of like advertising, and like he did some like what do they call it? Multi-camera,
Like live editing?
Sitcom.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff. And, I was a much more sort of like pretentious kid, watching like Criterion Collection at like 14. And,
Yeah.
and like, he kind of like went over his head. I remember watching a Chris Marker movie with him when I was like 16, and he tried to watch it with me. And after about 20 minutes, he was like, "This is too cerebral. I'm out." And I was like loving it. And so, so I went in like a kind of a totally different direction from the rest of my family, but still within that, business.
Yeah.
And I feel like I had, I went away to school. I went to school in Toronto, University of Toronto, studied cinema studies there, but purely theoretical. Didn't do any production in college. I thought I actually wanted to do like film festival curation and stuff like that, or like programming.
Oh, cool.
And then got to I was recording a lot of music in college. I was in a band and stuff, and I was kind of like, I think I want to like get my hands dirty, like I don't know if like writing about films and watching films for the rest of my life is really what I want to do, because I'd done that for like 4 years.
Are you saying like in school were you creating small versions of that? Like were you organizing events and things like that?
Yeah. I was part of like, there was a group called SINSU, the Cinema Studies Student Union. We would put films up. We would get like film prints. This was like 2010, I guess. It was when I graduated. So it was still relatively easy to get film prints. I mean, I guess it still is, but and so every Friday we would do like a free film screening.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so I was like in that world. And I probably would have been happy, but I don't know. I would just like, then I would come home and I would like record music, and I was teaching myself Pro Tools, and like, I was like, I think this is kind of more my vibe.
What kind of band was it?
I was like, art rock.
Yeah.
That kind of like Radiohead kind of vibes.
Were you doing shows and stuff like that too? Like trying?
Yeah, we did some shows.
That's fun.
Yeah, I was like more into the recording, but.
Oh, okay. So were you kind of feeling like you could have gone into like a producer route or engineering route, or was that like an interest, or were you just like making your own thing?
It was purely a hobby.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to keep it as a hobby too. I felt like if I did it professionally, it would take all the fun out of it. But editing felt like something. It felt like a combination of all those things too, right? Like
Yeah.
You have to. I think there's a musicality to it that you have to have. And,
Yeah.
Music is definitely a big part of a lot of the stuff I cut. And so I got out of school. I moved back home to LA. So I was lucky.
Yeah. Right.
I just started working. My first job was actually like as a payroll clerk, because my stepmom was a production accountant, but it was on like an HBO show called Big Love.
Okay.
And it was kind of neat to like, because like, I don't know, accounting, you kind of get like a bird's eye view of the whole production.
Sure.
And I was kind of able to see, I was able to like go on to set, because the offices were like right next to the sets, and kind of got to see what was going on. And then, as soon as that show ended, I got straight into post, started doing like conform editing for the effects, and then took like a post PA job on like a big feature. And then,
But you weren't studying. Were you like in school, or like had you had your hands on editing aside from like Pro Tools and music editing? You were just
No, well, my dad was an editor. He got me a copy of Avid when I was in like 8th grade.
Oh, sure, right.
I made my first film, and I think I cut it on something crazy like Sony Vegas.
Oh yeah.
You remember that?
Oh yeah, it was like a starter pack.
Yeah.
It was that Windows Movie Maker, whatever, like those first things you're trying to discover.
Yeah, like Video Wave.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like cutting, and I totally dropped it during college. Well, that's not true. I remember now we cut some music videos for the band.
Oh, cool.
And stuff.
Yeah.
So I kind of kept it up, but yeah, no, I don't know. I kind of felt like I was starting from scratch. I mean, I guess I did know Avid. I'd like learned Avid, which is like, it's like, it's got its own language, that software. So you kind of have to like learn it.
Which was like an industry standard at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But were you feeling like, were your parents, like especially like your dad, were you like going to work with, ever going to check out what he was doing and getting inspired by that? Or was it like him just, I don't know, you have a parent, someone played baseball in college and they like want to like share that with their kid or whatever, and then maybe you get into baseball. Was a similar path for
Totally.
Yeah. So you guys bonded over it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you feel like he taught you?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, we were going to movies like every weekend, and that was back in the days when it's like people that were like lining up around the block for a movie, to get a good seat and stuff. Opening weekend and whatever. And then, I was like going into like color bays with him and on dub stages, and I don't know, what did I learn from him? It's a lot of like little things.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd have to be in the moment to sort of remember, like, there's definitely some things that he said that like stick with me.
Yeah.
Like go with your gut, which like when you're cutting is like, it's really easy to get in your head about stuff. And to like cut for an audience, an imagined audience. Sometimes that's your director, and what I've learned over the years is like, I have to sort of go with my gut. Like he said, like, do what I think is right. Mm-hmm. And even if I get a note back that it's not right, or that they want it a slightly different way, it's still the end product is always still better if I'm keeping that in mind.
Yeah.
If I'm like, doing what I think is right, as opposed to, trying to please someone or trying to imitate something else or something like that.
Which is what I feel like I would want out of an editor. If, like when you're making a choice, like someone that feels
I think so.
confident. Yeah. And I think when you, people can become indecisive and you get caught in a corner really easy in those moments. So that makes sense that he said that. So you go into finding work. How are you going about finding these jobs? I mean, you're in LA, so I'm assuming like just the network that maybe from your family, and maybe that was a route.
That definitely helped, for sure. But like ironically, my mom had worked in production, like she produced a lot of commercials and stuff. But eventually moved out of it, and she became a realtor like when I was born, because the hours are a lot easier. Like she could not produce commercials and raise a kid. Yeah. She was like a single parent too, so like. But ironically, she ended up working with a lot of people in the industry, I guess probably from, her contacts and stuff. And so she just set me up with a coffee, to have coffee with an editor named Billy Goldenberg. And it was just, I think she was actually trying to get me to like not become an editor. Or I think he was when he met me. He was like, "Do you really want to do that?" It was like, it was more, he was like, "If you want to do this, like, this is what it's going to be like."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, "No, I'm game."
Yeah.
And he was like, "All right."
How was he describing it?
It's long hours. It's long hours. He's working at a very high level. So after that coffee, I was a PA on Argo that he cut. And then he won the Oscar for it.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like 12-hour days minimum.
Yeah.
And you're like in a dark room all day. You're not, you know, I just remember him being like, you know, if you're a screenwriter, like you can't write all day. I mean, I know writers who put in 8 hours a day and they're just machines. But he's like, you know, most of the writers I know, you write for 4 hours a day and then you go and you like play tennis the rest of the day, or you know, because you're still writing in your head, you know, but you get to be out, you get, you know, the lifestyle, you know, the quality of life is better.
Yeah. One like 8-second note that needs to be adjusted could take like 5 hours of work trying to.
Yeah.
You can't leave.
Really time consuming.
Yeah. But you seem to gravitate towards it. Like you seemed like there was something that was intriguing about it. That
definitely at the time I was like hungry.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm game. Like I really wanted to just bury myself in creating stuff.
Yeah. PA work. So you did that job, and then when did it transition into editing? Or were you also confident that editing was the thing, or were you interested in anything that could have been more on set or any other roles?
No, at least back then I was like way too shy to do anything else.
Really?
Yeah, I wanted to be alone in a room. Yeah,
that's fair.
Now I could be on set.
Yeah,
but I am still. I think I don't know. There's another editor that sort of described like to this day he goes onto set and he's like always tripping over cables and like, you know, I mean all these lights and stuff. I'm like, whoa, this is like too complicated. You know, like I just need a computer with like
a coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're good to go.
Yeah. But yeah, how did I go about getting? Well, so I remember like while I was PAing on that movie, I was cutting stuff on the side. I think I was making a film with a really good friend of mine that I'd grown up with, who he had gone to Chapman University. Mm-hmm. So he had really done like the production thing, and so we were co-writing. He was directing, I was editing. So we were doing that on the side, you know, just like shooting on the weekends and stuff. And through that, we were meeting people. Somebody that I had met while I was doing the like conform editing for VFX, he was making like a web series for Mocha TV at the time, which was like, you know, Mocha is the museum in LA, and it was a show called Feast of Burden. Director Eugene Kotlyarenko, who's gone on to do like a lot of really great films. Most recently, Spree. I don't know if you saw that. I think it was at Sundance a couple years ago.
This friend was on that project and was trying to loop you in?
Yeah, well, he had a web series, and I was cutting the web series like on the side while I was doing the PA stuff. And I just like kind of, I don't know, you know, work begets work. You work with one person, and then that person has a friend that needs somebody, and you know, just like it snowballs, mm-hmm. you know. Were
you getting paid in these early? Were you no? This is just trying to get your?
Yeah, I think like the web series, you know, it was 10 episodes, I think, and it was me and another editor, Ben Moses Smith, and we were like switching off.
Yeah.
So it was like 5 episodes. I got paid like, I think it was like $1,000 maybe for the whole thing, maybe $1,500. Yeah. I was working on it, you know, way longer than that.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thing I was doing with my friend, we were just
passion.
We were paying other people to do it. And yeah, no, I was working for free on all sorts of stuff for the first couple of years. Yeah.
So what was you're doing the VFX stuff? Do you transition out of that into, you know, you doing the series, and then what's kind of the first real job that you feel like started to make an impact in your career?
What was the first job? Oh, I remember now. So, and it was like it was like, so Billy, the editor on Argo, had a friend who needed like a sizzle or like a tone reel, basically cut for a film that he was trying to raise money for. And so I cut that, and it was like he hadn't shot anything. It was like we were taking things from other films to sort of as like a tone piece. And then that guy, like went to the same synagogue as this woman who was making a documentary about her father. It was a film called Requiem for a Running Back, about like CTE. That was kind of my first real job, or felt like my first real job. I started cutting for her. I think initially she was like, I just need someone to teach me Avid, because they were cutting on Avid. And I came in and basically, very quickly turned into her just being like, oh, you can just cut this for me. Ended up working on that for like a year and a half.
Jeez.
And I was like super green. So they brought in like a senior editor, Eliza Benora. And then she kind of took me on a bunch of her projects after that. I worked on like 4 or 5 movies with her.
Oh, wow.
And she was like super generous too. We were like sharing editing credit and stuff.
That's cool. I feel like that's not easy to come across sometimes.
No, not at all. Yeah, it was like I was super lucky to be like getting all those credits.
Yeah. How important was the mentorship that you were getting at that time from her?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, actually, like right when I started to cut with her, I was kind of like, I think I want to get out of this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm remembering now. So, man, that's funny. It's all coming back.
I like to dive deep.
Yeah, no, it's great. So Requiem for Running Back felt like the first real project because I was like editor and it was documentary, and I ended up doing a ton of documentaries. But actually right before that, I had been working on a horror film called Unfriended.
Okay.
And I was, it was me and this other guy, Andrew Westman, who worked on it.
It was like 2010? No,
we're like 2014 now.
Okay, cool.
2015. That movie ended up, getting sold to like Blumhouse, and it was like a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was like early days. It was like me trying to figure out how to do this, like, because it was, if you don't know it, it's like a screen movie. So it's like all on a computer screen. And all they had shot was they basically had like GoPros in a house. And they had shot all these kids, because the whole premise of the movie is there's all these kids on like a Skype call, like a group Skype call, because this is 2014.
Yeah.
Different. Forgot what I was.
Someone
lost my train of thought.
Like joins their Skype call, and it's like a horror
Yes.
piece.
Yeah. And so it was like trying to figure out how to like render a computer screen, but in a way that you could cut, And so we were trying to figure out, and we were just like no budget. We didn't have any like graphic artists or anything. It was just me and like the director and the writer producer, Nelson Greaves.
That's
and, like,
crazy.
Yeah, it was wild. It was a wild 6 months. Definitely long nights, like would fall asleep in the office, and my girlfriend would call me like panicking, like, you didn't come home last night, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, oh, I just passed out during the render. That was actually my very very first gig, and I'd gotten connected with Nelson through a friend, a hip guy that he'd gone to college with. I was like working in an office with him, and he needed an editor on a short that he was producing. It was just like
the network portion of it.
Yeah.
But that's crazy that was one of the first projects. This is before you were taken under her wing, the other editor's wing.
Yeah. So that was where.
But then this was a huge success. This film was
but it took a couple years after, because like I worked on it for like 6 months, and like I said, like the hours were crazy, and I burned out.
Yeah.
Took some time off. Then went into the doc and found that I really loved the doc stuff. But it was in that time, like I burned out on the horror project, and I was kind of like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do this. Like maybe I should go back to school or whatever. Like I didn't really have a plan, but I was kind of like, I did have a plan. I was thinking my girlfriend was from Vermont at the time, and we were thinking about moving back there and like opening like a theater or something, like going back to the old plan from college, right? Like the curation and the programming and stuff like that. But then we went and visited, and we knew the guy that owned the like art house theater in, what was that town? Montpelier in Vermont. And he was like, dude, owning your own business is like a totally different game.
Yeah.
He was like, you know, it's you're always working. And he's like, so if your goal is to like have a better, you know, work-life balance or like, you know, different lifestyle, like, I don't know if this is really the answer for you. And so I was kind of thinking about it. And then I started working with Eliza. And Eliza was really the first editor that I met where I was like, oh, like, I really connected with her in the way that she approached her work in like a big way. I mean, I had connected with Billy, you know, like just like pounding it out. And Eliza is much more sort of, and I think you have to be like this in docs, like she's more of like a writer.
Right.
Know? And she's kind of like, no, you sit at your computer, you edit, and then you walk away. Right. You know, and you go, you take a walk, you go out to get your lunch. You don't eat your lunch at your desk. Mm-hmm. You know, she
helped you set boundaries.
Yeah. And she had been, she'd worked in advertising for like at least a decade before she had moved into docs. She had cut with like all these huge commercial directors at the time, like Joe Pitka and Tony Kaye, like in the 80s and 90s when like advertising was this like super sexy kind of thing. Yeah. And like really avant-garde and like wild. So she had been through that ringer, you know, and like had come out the other side and been like, you know, you can do it this way. And that was just, that was like, it made me fall in love with working on stuff again.
Yeah. So it seemed like, excuse me, it seemed like she's this lifeline. Like, it's crazy to think that you were that close to bailing, like to literally travel there and go meet with a business owner to like explore that idea.
Yeah.
And maybe that person giving you the not like, I don't know, man. And to make you question it a little bit farther than to fall back into that. Cause it's crazy to be like working in that environment and you're like close to the sun, but you feel so far away.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because that horror film ends up becoming something later on, but you had your hands on it. And then you're getting this new exposure to like doc filmmaking and storytelling, which at the time, you know, when you're exploring docs, it's like, is a lot of the times when you were being brought on these early docs, are they shooting as they go, or are you getting all the footage and you're starting post after productions happen?
For the most part, the films were like 80, 90% shot by the time I came on. And there's almost always like they're shooting some extra B-roll or an extra interview, like, oh, we got this guy and we want to interview him or whatever. So yeah.
Was it like strictly doc work for a while at that point, or were you still taking
definitely.
other projects?
Yeah. It was like strictly doc stuff. So yeah, I basically like the last movie I worked on with Eliza was a movie called Ghost Fleet. And that was where I met Greg Quidar, who produced Train Dreams, which I'm here with now, also produced Jockey. And so like that was kind of how I then broke into the scripted stuff, back into the scripted stuff. And so, yeah, so it was kind of like that was the connection, you know, between all of those things. And that's how I met Clint. Clint and Greg are like best friends.
And when you were thinking, like if you're doing doc work and you're finding a passion for it, but you had already dabbled in scripted, were you worried? Like if that thing kind of burned you out, did you feel worried going back to it? Or do you feel like you had a reset that allowed you to think differently or approach it differently that made it easier?
Yeah, no, it was, I wasn't worried about it at all. And I was even, I mean, I guess I had kind of like rekindled my, you know, workaholic kind of feeling by then because again, I was like cutting Jockey on the side, like while I was cutting Alan v. Farrow, which was like a 4-part huge HBO doc series.
Yeah. You're doing both simultaneously? Mm-hmm. Do you do that often?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to stop doing that though.
Yeah. It sounds very complicated and keeping the right mindset, but also how the hell do you have time for that?
I mean, well, I mean, now I have a kid, so I don't have time for
Right.
that. But at the time, yeah, I don't know. You work during the day on one thing and you work on the other thing at night before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Weekends. I think with Alan V. Farrow, I was on Alan V. Farrow for like 2 years.
Jeez.
And that was actually maybe closer to like 30-40% shot when I came on. And I was on it for 2 years because they didn't know what it was at first. And it had kind of been born out of an interview that they had done with Dylan Farrow, just by chance for another project. And they were like, oh, we're going to break this off into like its own thing now.
Right.
Because then they got the interview with Mia and like they started to develop relationships with them. And yeah, it just became, you know, when I came on in like April of 2019 and they were trying to do Sundance 2020.
Wow.
It was clear by like August that like it was totally, you know.
When did that come out?
It came out.
21?
Yeah, 2021.
So if it's in a project like that, if it's 40% shot, does a lot of that then depend on what you guys are experimenting with in the editing? So is that shaping a lot for the director and like how they're going to approach the story? Because what was that? That's a deep dive into some pretty, you know, intense, very dark stuff.
Pedophilia.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. So when you're working on that, how much of that is a relationship with you and the director, and are you, you know, trying to shape the initial story or deciding like what it could go into? Because it is an interesting thing from an editing standpoint. Editors, so much of it relies on the editing to, you know, it's all shaped in the edit. So could you give an example of like how that was developing through your guys's back and forth?
Yeah. So on that one, it was the main editor on that, Michaela Schwer, the first editor, she had come on like a couple months before I had come on, so it was for the first year, Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, the co-directors, were working on another film of theirs, On the Record, which premiered here 2020, I think. So they were like, at the time they were really like relying on their editors to come to them and be like, we need this, like here's what you have. Because they would shoot interviews and they would shoot pretty minimal B-roll, pretty minimal, you know, and it was like they would love to see like a string out of like, here's what a potential scene could be, and it would just be like a radio edit basically.
Right.
And then from that, you know, they would go, you know what we need? We need to interview this expert on this thing, you know. And one of the big things that I did on that film was like trying to figure out the like critical angle of, you know, there's this whole thread in the whole series about like Woody Allen's work and how he was sort of, you know, hiding in plain sight with films like Manhattan and stuff like that. And I had this like academic background in cinema studies, so I kind of knew how to navigate that world. And like, you know, I was writing questions for the interviewees and like helping them pick, like, you know, I would read critical analysis of his films and be like, we need to interview this woman who wrote this piece on Manhattan and stuff like that. So it was very collaborative like that. And even like, you know, one of the big things Michaela did was like, Michaela like went and shot B-roll. Like she was basically like a second unit director. Because we early on, one of the DPs on that project, Thorsten, had shot really beautiful footage of Mia Farrow's house, like out in the country in Connecticut. And we really quickly realized that like, oh, we could do like a whole, we could really make a character out of this house, you know, and build a B-roll language around the house. He had shot it all in this like kind of, everything was backlit, and it was like, you know, it felt haunted.
Yeah. It's a cool creative decision.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where it was like Michaela and I kind of found it as we were cutting with stuff, you know, and we were like, ooh, this is cool. And then, you know, they would be like, hey, we have a chance to like go back and shoot more of the house. And so Michaela like flew out there and like got more stuff, because we'd been working with like this bare minimum stuff that they just shot like while they were there.
Yeah.
And so she was able to go and like shoot with more intention and like, you know.
Do you feel is there projects where you deal with non collaborative teams, and does it put you in a hard, like a more of a pinch, because it's like in this instance, you guys are able to go and explore and come up with ideas that can help you solve problems in your edit. You're able to go get the things that you need to fill in holes and fill in gaps, or make something maybe flow a little bit easier or whatever. But is there times where you like, you know, oh man, this would make this so much better if we did X, Y, Z, but there's people that are not open to hearing feedback, and is that frustrating? Or
no, I don't think I've ever worked with people that are like not open to feedback. What I would say is I do work with people that I would say most of the time I work with people that don't have a clearer vision, like sort of intentionally, like they want to find it as they go.
Yeah.
But I've also worked with people that have a really clear vision, and they're very open to stuff, but you start to realize over the course of the edit that like, oh, this is baked in. Like, it was scripted this way for a reason, kind of thing. And you know, I'm used to the situation where it's like, I got to come up with a lot of ideas. Like as a doc editor, like you're kind of given just a pile of footage and it's like, figure it out, you know? So I'm used to working like that. And I definitely approach a lot of my scripted stuff like that. Like I'll read the script, maybe I'll read like the scene before I cut the assembly or something, but I don't know, the script kind of goes out the window once you have your assembly, and then you're just working with the edit. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes you end up breaking stuff because you don't realize the architecture of what was originally there, you know. And especially if you read the script and it's really great, you know, it's good to go back and reread and sort of, you know, understand the architecture of why you felt a certain way while you were reading the script.
Sure.
And figure out how to translate that into the edit.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think I'm only just starting to realize. Like that was a big part of cutting Train Dreams, I think. And Train Dreams is even, you know, even stranger because there's also like a novella that you can go back and reference. And obviously they had changed a ton of stuff in the script, but you know, there's a narrator in that film, which is both a blessing and a curse, right? It's like it becomes very easy to use a narrator to bring a completely new meaning to any scene. But it's also very easy, you know, it becomes very easy for it to become prescriptive very quickly. So you have to be careful. You have to like kind of walk that line very delicately. And so there was a process on that of like kind of going back to the book and seeing the role that the narrator played in the book at the time, or, you know, the role that the narrator played in the book, and then seeing how they had morphed that in the script, and sometimes being like, why don't we go back? You know, Dennis Johnson has some really beautiful, tasty language that he writes. And we were able to kind of go back and look at the book and be like, oh, fuck, that line's fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
You know? Really, really tasty, and like, you know, just writes in like an old way of speaking that like just isn't second nature to us at all. Brought a lot of that back. Brought a lot of like the backstory of the main character into play. And so yes, but then we would go back to the script and we'd be like, yeah, actually, Clint, the line that you rewrote is actually better than what Dennis wrote, you know, or better.
Maybe work better.
Yeah, it fit the style of the film better.
Right.
You know, it was, because some of his stuff was like too flowery. Some of his stuff was like a little bit much.
Right.
It was like, it needed to be simplified down. Like the film is much more sort of minimalist than the book. The book is like super sprawling and all over the map. And the film is much more sort of straight ahead and which it needed to be in order to render it like a more emotional experience.
Sure.
And more cinematic.
When you're, because I'd love to talk about like workflow. Like, obviously we're here with Adobe. And I know you use Adobe products for both films that are out here at Sundance right now.
Both of them.
And I think a lot of your work that you've been doing. Is it, when you're attacking, there's from a doc perspective, which is Andre, you're morphing both of your two languages together, right? With that film?
Yeah. In a bit. Yeah.
Like pulling from both experiences that help you tie your style of editing.
Well, director Tony Benna and a huge portion of the crew, even Andre himself, they had all done commercials. So yeah, there is a bit of that like constructed, Andre I think is more constructed than a lot of the docs that I've worked on that are, more verite driven or sort of like, all docs are highly constructed, but this one in particular, there's a lot of like animations and there's a lot of like B-roll sequences that are, even more sort of planned out than what we were doing in LV Farrow, for example.
Sure.
So I forgot your question.
Well, no,
I think I interrupted you.
You're fine. You're fine. I think like I'd be curious to know like how did you approach both of these films? Did you approach them the same way, or like especially? And then I would love to hear how you approach docs, like workflow wise, like for editors that are listening to this and thinking about how they would approach this. Going into feature films, it's like there's so much that you're having to think about, like you going back into the books and really doing your research to think of like how to be as compelling as possible from the editing side, which just that extra work alone I think may be slept on by some editors. They might not go and do that much work. So what's your typical workflow from getting brought onto a project? First off, how did getting brought onto these projects? What's your thoughts going into them? Like, how are you deciding to take the job with Train Dreams? How did you decide to take the job for that?
I'd worked with Clint before.
Yeah. And
like we had just had such a good time doing Jockey. It was like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It was kind of like whatever he's going to do next, I want to do.
Right.
And then I read his script and I was like, yeah, I definitely want to do this.
Yeah.
But I guess to the other part of your question about like workflow and stuff, and specifically like the Premiere side of it, one of the reasons that I love to work in Premiere is like two things, I guess. The speech to text stuff, I use that a ton, and like the text-based editing, especially in the docs. Mostly in the docs.
How was an example of how you're using it?
We transcribe like everything, all the interviews. And you transcribe like the source clips so that when you cut it into a new timeline, like everything's still there. And you can keep editing the words, and you can edit like on a word level like that. Like on Alan V. Farrow, because Kirby really likes to work with paper cuts, the director. It was like he would do a paper cut from, transcript of an interview, and then I'd have to build that manually. We had like script sync. We were in Avid on that, so it was like we had script sync. So I was able to do it, but like then I would send it back to him, and then he would do another round of paper. He'd make like notes on the paper cut, like the transcript of the cut. He would watch the cut, and then he would just like do all of his notes on the transcript, and then we'd have to like go through and do it again. And like on Premiere, it's like you don't have to do any of I don't have to like send it to the assistant to like run it through some third-party software to like do it,
Yeah.
It's just all there, and it's just like instantaneous, like he doesn't even have to sit down and like write stuff. He just kind of, he can just do it. He could be in there himself. So I guess approaching, that was kind of how I approached Andre initially, because it was very interview heavy. They had done a lot of verite stuff towards the end of the shoot because they were shooting through COVID, so it was like a lot easier to do interviews. And they also didn't totally know like the trajectory of his illness and stuff like that. And then towards the end, they were able to get some more verite stuff. But even the verite stuff, I transcribed a lot and kind of did like a text text-based edit, like for the first, draft or two. And then from there, then I would sort of like set all the text stuff aside and just cut. And, I think also the other reason that I really like to use Premiere is I just feel like the sound mixing and stuff is really powerful.
Sure.
It's like a lot easier to get like a polished, finished mix.
That you're doing yourself as you go, like just to save time.
I'm not very good at it, but I do it.
Yeah.
It gets us, to the point where everybody feels good enough about it to like lock picture, know, and then a real mixer comes in, especially we had great mixers on both of them. But on Train Dreams, Lee Salavan, who's fucking brilliant, basically wipes away all my work and starts over, which is great. But the work I am able to do in Premiere, like on an offline edit, is like huge. I minimum, I usually have like 64 audio tracks.
Right.
Because I'm like keeping everything separate so that I can bus things into stuff so I can like equalize all the music, kind of, bump up the lows, like maybe bump up the highs, but definitely like dip it kind of around the dialogue range so that it's like a lot easier to mix dialogue, and like all the dialogue gets filtered through a bus so that I'm like, I have like a, what's it called? Just drop out all the low end,
right.
So like all that boom mess and stuff like all goes away. And it's like, again, this is why the mixes are like, they're functional. And they're like definitely sound way better than most of the offline edit stuff that you see. And I'm also able to do all of it myself. Like a big editor like Billy, like he's got a whole team of assistant editors that are like music cutting and sound effects cutting for him. And like I'm able to do all of that kind of in the box. And like
makes it seem like so much more efficient, but also allows you to like set a tone, or even maybe does that help you set a tone for yourself, which helps you create a better groove in editing?
Yeah, totally. You know? Like, I've started to get to the point like where I'll have like an assistant editor or an additional editor that like approaches sound in the same way that I do. On Train Dreams, I had a guy, Carl Stieg, who's like a brilliant editor and really good with sound, and I'm able to pass stuff off to him, but I kind of like to do it myself.
Yeah.
Because like as I'm getting in there and laying in backgrounds and dropping in little sweetening sound effects and stuff like that, like I'm still picture editing too. You know? And as I drop in those things, I realize like, oh, I can let this breathe a little more, or I don't know why I'm hanging on this so long, like take that out, right. And you discover that stuff as you're kind of mixing and you go back and forth, and it kind of jogs you out of the very careful decisions that you made, and you kind of look at it with fresh eyes and stuff like that. So I like to do it all myself.
Do you feel like it makes it a bit, do you often have a director that hops in with you on an edit, like, and using programs like that make it easier for you?
Yeah. I mean, most of the times that I've worked with directors, I think actually like almost every project I've worked on, at least in the last couple of years, the directors are all doing some cutting and like comfortable doing cutting themselves, but they all prefer to use Premiere. I guess the one exception was the Netflix show that you mentioned.
Oh yeah, right.
The showrunner on that is like, does a lot of editing. And that was on Avid, so he was comfortable with Avid.
Sure.
And we swapped stuff with that. But for the most part, yeah, like Tony and Clint both like to dig into the edit themselves, and they know Premiere really well.
Yeah. How are you setting up your projects? Like, how do you micromanage yourself, and are you doing it in reels? Or are you, by scene? Like, how do you like prefer to work?
I mean, sometimes I like to work in reels. On Train Dreams, we split stuff into reels. Eventually we have to, I also do like, I stay on after the edit to like do all the like deliverables and stuff. And at least on the last feature I did with them, we needed to deliver stuff in reels. So So we'll split stuff up for that. I don't know. It's also kind of cumbersome. I prefer to just have one big timeline, and then I'll sort of like chop stuff out as I work on it. Like I'll just kind of like take a sub clip out, basically, or subsequence, I guess it's called. Because it's also less processor intensive, and also it's like if by chance I use the ripple edit tool wrong and then I knock a whole 20 audio tracks out of sync, it only fucks up the one scene instead of the whole movie.
Right.
So I like to do that kind of stuff. Also, I like to, especially in the features, like whatever company processes the dailies likes to sync the audio for you. I don't like that. I like to sync it myself. I like to have it in like a multi-clip so that I can access the like original audio and like see the original audio files. For some reason, I'm like really bullish on that.
Sure.
It's a little bit of extra work and an extra lift, but it's worth it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it, are you usually do you have AEs when you're on your films, like in this film, are you leaning on anybody, or do you really just prefer to just have your hands completely all over it?
I don't mind doing the assistant work. I had assistants on both of these. The guy I mentioned before, Carl Stieg, he basically on Train Dreams, he did the like assembly edit.
Yeah.
So because I was still working on Andre while they were shooting Train Dreams. So he was doing a lot. He was doing all the assistant work, and then he would like assemble scenes. So that by the time I stepped in, like I had a full assembly to work from. I had been like, I would drop in on the weekends to kind of, and like do like a very specific scene, or I would kind of like take a section and like mess with it. But yeah, so I had him, and then I had him on for like a couple of weeks into the edit, and then I had him on again. Actually, no, I had him on like throughout, off and on. I had to, because we were juggling all these VFX, and we did multiple sound turnovers. We were doing like pre-dubs and stuff. So yeah, I never would have been able to do it without him. And I also had another, I guess, just like a VFX coordinator, basically,
right?
That just dealt with the VFX for like a couple of weeks while it was really hot and heavy.
Do you do light VFX? Are you ever hopping in After Effects and doing little things on your own? Or?
I want to learn it.
Yeah.
If for nothing else, just to do like split comps, like basic things. I mean, I'll do those in Premiere. So if it's like locked off, it's super easy. But
yeah.
Like the scripted thing I did before this, Sing Sing, there were they were shooting a lot more like dirty over the shoulder than the DP on Train Dreams likes to. And so there were a lot of split comps on that. And I just like did them kind of dirty in Premiere. And then had my buddy Russell do like the final, bring him to final, and I don't know. I don't think he works in After Effects though. I think he works in something else. The VFX stuff is all kind of, I don't know. I'm much more audio oriented.
Yeah,
right? Like teaching myself Pro Tools and stuff like that. That's definitely more my strength. But I wanna get better at doing comping and stuff. And I think also with like, it's become a lot easier to sort of do the dumb version of it that I would probably do,
Well, the technology is like, I mean, now we're in the AI world, right? Exactly. So it's like, how do you feel about that? And like, where do you see it going for, simplifying certain things? Even sound, it's helping with, adjustments on. Yeah.
I mean, I'm using a lot of AI stuff, and from my perspective, it's all, the big worry is it's taking, work away from humans.
Mm-hmm.
In my world, the like low budget film world, it's just that I'm able to do stuff that we wouldn't have been able to afford before, or like taking the music out of if I have a piece of archival and it's like, there's music under it and I just want the dialogue, like I'm actually able to do that. And it sounds decent.
Yeah.
The like enhance thing in Adobe Premiere is like really powerful, and it's like right there. It's in the box. It's like very easy to use.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would imagine too that like, and also, I mean, just AI like transcription, like text to, or speech to text stuff. we're transcribing stuff that we wouldn't have been able to afford to have a human transcribe, or there just wouldn't be time.
Well, I think that's the cool part about it is like, because as soon as I bring up AI, anytime I'm always like, that's what you have to defend first is people's jobs. But there's so many times where it's like, just hearing you talk, it's like you seem to want, you do it from start to finish and have your hands on all of it. So there's a world where you wouldn't even outsource some of those things. Transcriptions back in the day, it's like you would go do that before, but like now you're going and able to do the work, and it's saving you. You're just saving tons of time. You know what I mean? Tons of time and being able to like get closer to the final thing that you want to do because we have these resources, which is the cool part about it, in my opinion. It's like, I don't know. It's allowing me to explore more. Like I did it when we did our short, like, you know, we shot everything looks like this. And then we're like, wait, this could be the poster. And like I tossed in Photoshop and our post, like it made this vertical version of it. And it was so close to being real. And I was like, this is bizarre. Like, and I wouldn't even have I just wouldn't even have made that. I wouldn't have like outsourced that. I wouldn't even thought like, oh yeah, maybe we can make this, but you know what I mean? Like it added more sky and it rebuilt like the lake or whatever. It was like so interesting. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I think it, you know, at least at the moment, I like to think that it's opening doors for me, at least the way that I'm using it. You know, the broader sort of like questions that people are asking of like, what does this mean? And should we keep putting money into these kinds of things if we can just get a computer to do it?
Right.
That's all a little scary.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
Yeah.
Just in general, like I find myself going back to that place of like, I don't know, should I go back to grad school? You know, like one of the producers on Andre is an Idiot, I was talking to him. He's like, yeah, I'm like in architecture school now.
Really?
Like getting out of the game. And like he's a big producer. He could have any job he wants, but I don't know. He's getting out.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know.
If you're dealing with a feature, we're talking a lot of minutes. How are you dealing with the workflow of like feedback and adjusting? You know, maybe someone's wanting to update something that happened in the beginning, but you've been spending the last month working on something in the end. Like, how do you handle the workflow of the project? Like, literally handle it. Like, are you using Frame and is it notes and are you implementing those notes? How do you actually manage to make sure you're staying on top of all your notes?
Yeah, I mean, Frame.io was like a big part of both the projects that I worked on. You know, being able to have notes that are just time coded directly is huge. You know, eventually you get to a point where you know where things are. You don't need time codes, but you know, I don't know. When you have assistants coming on and stuff like that, who aren't as familiar with stuff, it's crucial. And also, we were all working remote. Like I was working out of my house. The director was in Dallas. VFX supervisor was in Portugal. Colorist was in Sao Paulo.
Wow.
So, you know. And I think when we first started to toss stuff back and forth, it was all kind of like the colorist would upload stuff to Google Drive and the VFX guy was doing it to Dropbox and like, I don't know, it was just all kind of a mess. And then I just like centralized it all on Frame.io at a certain point, and it was so much more seamless. And, you know, the uploads through the app are so much more reliable. And then also like with the color, it was like, you can just hit all the notes and like they're all there. You can import the markers if you want to do that. You know, I don't know. We wouldn't have been able to finish on time if we didn't have it, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
It's, you're at Sundance. I appreciate you sharing your story and talking with me. You're here. You have 2 films out right now. Do you feel like this is like you can relax? Like if you were literally in the edit like a week or 2 ago on a film that's premiering here, it's like, are you getting close to like I take a break for a second? Do you go right into the next project? Like how do you balance moving forward? Or like I can't imagine how many times you watch the film like Q scene.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like how much time it takes so much time. Do you take a break? Do you go right into the next project? Or what's next for you?
I'm taking a break.
Are you?
I need to take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've rolled straight from one project to the next for the last like 18 months. So yeah, I'm at another one of those kind of crossroads in my career where I'm like a little burnt out,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to take some time to. And part of that is being here. You know? I mean, I'm working, but but it's also like beautiful out there.
Yeah,
and it's nice to sort of take a breather.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm starting up on something, not next week, but the week after that, getting back into something.
Oh, so you were just talking about like a literal like week and a half break.
Yeah,
He's
which
like
feels like an eternity for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it?
the
I mean,
best I can do.
is that the crucial part? Is like finding, work-life balance, that whole topic or whatever. But when you go, and also it's like you want to seize every opportunity. So is it hard to say no? Especially like you said,
Really
like
hard.
if my friend hits me up, I'm gonna do it because I love my friend and I love working on projects with my friends. Like, yeah. How do you decide to like when do you say no?
I'm not very good at saying no. I mean, I kind of had to say no on this. It depends on. I mean, I do, like we were talking about earlier, like I need to stop doubling up.
Yeah.
Working on one thing on the weekends, working on something else during the week. Like, I mean, I know a lot of freelancers that obviously, do that all the time. But I think for the kind of work that I do, it's much more long term and sort of all encompassing. And
Sure.
so I don't know. I have to learn how to say no.
Yeah.
I think.
Good luck.
Yeah.
This is one of my last questions.
Yeah.
Seeing your projects on streaming platforms or in the theatrical releases, things like that, what does that like mean for you? You know what I mean? What does that mean to you? As like, are you at that point? Are you like almost? Is it like you're numb to it because you've been around it for so long, or is it like, 2 years from now you're scrolling through a streaming service and you see the thumbnail for the film that you spent 2 years smashing your head against a computer trying to figure out how to make it complete?
Mm-hmm.
What's that feel for you? Like, what's the feeling for you?
It's very like, I don't know, it kind of comes back to like closure and like it's satisfying and it feels very like legitimizing, especially if it's a film, a lot of the docs I work on are, they're cause driven and stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of look back on that and I go like, I'm like doing something good.
That's
like,
cool.
Feel good about what I'm spending, 2 years, 12 hours a day locked in a room doing.
Yeah.
And it's like legitimizing, I think just now I feel like I'm starting to go like, like every project I do is like, gets a lot of eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
There's still pretty niche, but it's also, popular. I mean, Sing Sing I worked on 2 years ago. It's like getting nominated for Oscars. It's wild.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like it I don't know. It's kind of surreal. I'm not, I don't know if I'm numb from having watched it so many times, but I'm a little numb from just like, the movie kind of takes a life of its own.
Yeah. Do you celebrate it?
Yeah, I try to. I don't, but also it's like I'm already buried in the next thing. I'm trying to figure out what the next thing I'm doing is, and so I don't know. And I also, I don't want it to like go to my head,
Sure.
So I don't know. I just see it as sort of like legitimizing. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm doing the work.
Yeah.
And like the work is good.
Yeah.
People are responding to it. And yeah, I like to celebrate it, but I don't like to get too caught up in it.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is the time to celebrate it this weekend.
I should.
You should do it.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. I will.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. Everyone needs to go check out these films. I'm excited to see them myself. Thanks for sharing the info.
Of course.
Yo, if you made it to this part of the episode, thanks so much for listening to Black or No Cream. I love that you guys are tuning in still. More episodes to come. Join the community if you haven't yet. It's completely free. bwnc.com/join. We would love to have you. Please join. Thanks to Adobe for doing these bonus episodes. Go check out the other ones.